The stagecoach rolled to a stop in a cloud of dust, the driver's shout cutting through the lazy afternoon heat of Delta, Colorado. Tabitha Lawson clutched her worn carpetbag tightly as the other passengers began to disembark, her heart racing with anticipation and fear. After 28 years in Boston, she was finally venturing west to start anew, leaving behind the whispers and cruel stares that had followed her since childhood. It was June 1875, and the Colorado Territory was still raw and untamed, promising both danger and opportunity in equal measure. Tabitha dabbed at the perspiration on her brow with a handkerchief, her ample figure already uncomfortable in the summer heat. She had heard tales of the frontier's hardships, but after her father's passing and the subsequent loss of their millinery shop, she had little choice but to accept her cousin's offer to join her in Delta. As the other passengers filed out, Tabitha waited her turn, painfully aware of the tight squeeze required to exit the coach. The stagecoach had been crowded for the final leg of her journey, with 6 passengers packed tightly into the vehicle designed for comfort rather than capacity. "Your turn, madam," the driver called, extending a hand to assist her. Tabitha maneuvered her substantial frame toward the door, her skirts catching on the edge of the seat. With considerable effort, she managed to extricate herself from the coach, her cheeks flushed with exertion and embarrassment as she heard snickers from onlookers gathered around the stage stop. "Thank you," she murmured, smoothing her travel-worn dress. The driver merely nodded, already turning his attention to unloading luggage from the top of the coach. Tabitha scanned the busy street, searching for any sign of her cousin Eliza who had promised to meet her. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, and she could feel perspiration beginning to soak through her layers of clothing. After waiting nearly half an hour with no sign of Eliza, Tabitha approached a shopkeeper sweeping the boardwalk outside his establishment. "Excuse me, sir. Could you direct me to the Prescott residence? I'm expected by my cousin, Eliza Prescott." The man's eyes widened slightly. "The Prescotts? Madam, I'm afraid they pulled up stakes 3 weeks ago. Mr. Prescott found silver up near Silverton and they couldn't pack fast enough." Tabitha's heart sank. "But that's impossible. I received a letter just before I left Boston. Mails slow out here, madam. They might have written before they decided to leave." Stunned, Tabitha thanked the man and retreated to a bench outside the stage depot. She was alone in an unfamiliar town, with limited funds and no accommodations. Her breath came in short gasps as panic threatened to overwhelm her. "Stage to Montrose leaves in 20 minutes. The depot manager called out, startling her from her thoughts. With few options available, Tabitha decided to continue on to Montrose where she might find work and lodging until she could contact Eliza. She approached the ticket counter, fishing coins from her reticule. "1 ticket to Montrose, please." The clerk eyed her critically. "That'll be $1.75. Tabitha counted out the coins, her heart heavy as she calculated her dwindling savings. The clerk handed her a ticket without meeting her eyes. "Boarding in 15 minutes. Don't be late." She nodded gratefully and moved toward the waiting area, where several passengers were already gathered. A family with 3 children occupied one bench, while 2 businessmen in suits claimed another. A young woman in a fine dress sat primly on a third bench, her expression pinched with distaste as she surveyed the room. Tabitha approached the remaining bench. "Excuse me, may I?" she asked the young woman. The woman's eyes swept over Tabitha's figure, and her lips thinned. "I'm afraid this seat is taken. My husband will be joining me momentarily." "Of course," Tabitha murmured, retreating to stand by the wall, her carpetbag growing heavier by the minute. One by one, the other passengers boarded the stage, and Tabitha noticed with dismay that the young woman's husband never appeared, yet she still refused to share the bench. When the call for final boarding came, Tabitha was the last to approach the coach. The driver frowned as she handed him her ticket. "It's a full coach today, madam." "I have a ticket," Tabitha insisted, presenting the paper slip. The driver scratched his head. "That may be, but there's a matter of, well, space. We've got 6 passengers already seated." Tabitha glanced into the coach, where indeed all seats appeared to be occupied, including one by the snobbish young woman who had claimed her husband would join her. "I need to reach Montrose today," Tabitha said, her voice trembling slightly. "I have no place to stay in Delta." "I understand, madam, but I can't be asking other paying passengers to be uncomfortable for the journey." The driver's voice held a note of finality. The young woman from the waiting room leaned out of the coach window. "Perhaps you should wait for tomorrow's stage," she suggested with false sweetness. "Or consider a private conveyance." Tabitha felt her face grow hot with humiliation, aware that several bystanders were watching the exchange. She was about to step away when a deep voice spoke from behind her. "I'll stand." Tabitha turned to see a tall man in a dust-covered duster and worn boots. His face was partially obscured by the brim of his Stetson, but she could make out a strong jawline dusted with stubble and eyes the color of a summer storm. "I beg your pardon," the driver asked. The man stepped forward, removing his hat to reveal sandy brown hair that curled slightly at the collar of his shirt. "The lady can have my seat. I'll stand for the journey." "Mr. Harrington, the road to Montrose is rough at best," the driver protested. "It's near 3 hours." "I've stood longer for less worthy causes," the man, Mr. Harrington, replied with a hint of steel in his voice. He turned to Tabitha and offered a slight bow. "Madam, if you'd be so kind as to accept my seat, I'd be obliged." Tabitha was so taken aback by the unexpected gallantry that she could only stare, her lips parted in surprise. "I couldn't possibly," she began. "I insist," he interrupted gently. Then, with a wink that only she could see, he added, "Truth be told, I get restless sitting too long anyway." Without waiting for further protest, he extended his hand to help her board. "Jacob Harrington, at your service." "Tabitha Lawson," she replied softly, allowing him to assist her into the coach. The other passengers shifted uncomfortably as she entered, the young woman's face pinched with annoyance. Tabitha settled into the vacated corner seat, placing her carpetbag at her feet, acutely aware of the space her body occupied in the crowded coach. Jacob climbed in after her, positioning himself near the door where he could hold onto the frame. The driver shook his head in disbelief before climbing up to his perch and releasing the brake. With a lurch, the stagecoach began its journey to Montrose. As the coach rattled out of town, Tabitha couldn't help stealing glances at her benefactor. Jacob Harrington stood with practiced ease, one hand gripping a leather strap hanging from the ceiling, the other braced against the door frame. His stance was wide to maintain balance on the uneven road, and she noticed calluses on his hands, a working man's hands. "You're very kind, Mr. Harrington," she ventured after they had cleared the town limits. He tipped his hat slightly. "Jacob, please, and it's no trouble, Miss Lawson." "Tabitha," she offered with a small smile. The young woman across from them made a disapproving sound in her throat but said nothing. As the journey progressed, the coach hit a particularly deep rut, causing everyone to lurch forward. Jacob maintained his balance with practiced ease, but Tabitha noticed him wince slightly. "Are you certain you wouldn't prefer to alternate?" she asked quietly. "I could stand for a while." He smiled, the expression transforming his weather-worn face. "I appreciate your concern, but I'm quite all right. Been on cattle drives that lasted weeks with barely a moment's rest. This is a Sunday stroll by comparison." Tabitha's curiosity was piqued. "You're a cowboy, then?" "I was," he acknowledged. "Rode with outfits from Texas to Montana. These days I run a modest spread outside Montrose. Nothing fancy, but it's mine." The businessman seated beside the young woman snorted. "Hardly what I'd call a profession, wrangling cows." Jacob's expression remained impassive, but Tabitha noticed a subtle tightening around his eyes. "It puts food on tables across this country, sir. I find honor enough in that." The businessman had the grace to look abashed and returned his attention to the papers in his lap. As the miles passed beneath the coach's wheels, the initial tension began to ease. The three children, initially curious about Tabitha's size, soon dozed off against their mother, while the businessman became engrossed in his documents. Only the young woman maintained her air of superiority, occasionally sighing dramatically when the coach swayed. "What brings you to these parts?" Jacob asked Tabitha, his voice low enough to afford them some privacy despite the close quarters. "I was to stay with my cousin in Delta, but it seems she's relocated to Silverton," Tabitha explained. "I'm hoping to find work in Montrose until I can decide what to do next." "What kind of work do you seek?" "I'm a milliner by trade. I design and create ladies' hats. My father and I ran a shop in Boston, but after he passed." She trailed off, unwilling to share the full story of her financial ruin with a stranger, no matter how kind. "Montrose has been growing quickly," Jacob observed. "Might be a place for your skills there. Mrs. Henderson over at the Mercantile has been talking about expanding into ladies' accessories." Hope flickered in Tabitha's chest. "You think she might be interested in speaking with me?" "I'd be happy to make an introduction," he offered. "I deliver beef to the Henderson kitchen twice monthly." The coach hit another bump, and this time Jacob couldn't hide his discomfort as he shifted his weight. "Please," Tabitha insisted, "take the seat for a while. I don't mind standing." Before Jacob could protest, the young woman interjected, "For heaven's sake, the poor man is clearly suffering. Perhaps, madam, you could simply wait for the next stage rather than subjecting us all to this absurd arrangement." A tense silence fell over the coach. Tabitha's face burned with humiliation, and she lowered her eyes to her lap. Jacob's voice, when he spoke, was dangerously soft. "Madam, I don't believe I caught your name." The woman blinked, taken aback. "Mrs. Caroline Edwards." "Well, Mrs. Edwards, where I come from, a lady is judged by her courtesy, not her circumstances. Miss Lawson has shown nothing but consideration for my comfort, while you've demonstrated a remarkable lack of Christian charity." His gaze was steady. "Perhaps it's worth considering which quality speaks more truly to a person's character." Mrs. Edwards' mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water before she turned away, color high on her cheeks. Tabitha stared at Jacob in astonishment. No one had ever defended her so boldly before. "You shouldn't have," she began. "I absolutely should have," he interrupted firmly. Then, with a softer expression, "Some folks forget that the same Lord who judges us all doesn't much care about appearances." The remainder of the journey passed in relative quiet. Jacob continued to stand, though he accepted Tabitha's offer of water from her canteen. When the coach finally rolled into Montrose as the sun was beginning to set, Tabitha felt both relief and a strange reluctance for the journey to end. As the passengers disembarked, Mrs. Edwards and her companions hurried away without a backward glance. Jacob helped Tabitha down from the coach, his strong hands gentle as they encircled her wrists. "Thank you again for your kindness, Mr. Jacob," she corrected herself. "I'm not certain what I would have done otherwise." He retrieved her carpetbag from the coach and handed it to her. "It was my pleasure, Tabitha. Now, about your situation, have you arrangements for the night?" "I thought to inquire at one of the boarding houses," she admitted, Glancing uncertainly down the unfamiliar street, Jacob frowned slightly. "Most will be full at this hour, I'm afraid." He hesitated, then seemed to come to a decision. "My sister runs a small hotel on Pine Street. Nothing fancy, but clean and respectable. I'd be happy to escort you there." Tabitha wavered, acutely aware of the impropriety of accepting further assistance from a man she had just met. Yet something in Jacob's steady gaze inspired trust, and her options were limited. "That would be very kind," she finally agreed. They walked side by side down Montrose's Main Street, Jacob pointing out landmarks as they went: the courthouse, the bank, Henderson's Mercantile. Tabitha noticed that he intentionally slowed his stride to match hers, never showing impatience when she needed to pause and catch her breath. "You mentioned cattle," she said as they turned onto Pine Street. "Have you been a rancher long?" "5 years on my own," he replied. "Before that, I rode for various outfits after the war, needed time to save enough for my own land." "You fought in the war?" Jacob nodded, his expression momentarily distant. "Union cavalry. Enlisted at 18, saw things no boy should see, came west afterward like many did." "My father served as well," Tabitha said softly. "The 20th Massachusetts. He returned changed, as most did." They shared a moment of understanding before Jacob gestured toward a 2-story building with a neat sign reading Pine Street Inn. "Here we are. My sister Hannah runs this place with her husband Thomas. They're good people." The inn was modest but well maintained, with window boxes full of geraniums and clean curtains visible through the windows. Jacob led Tabitha inside, where a slender woman with the same storm-colored eyes was arranging flowers at a small reception desk. "Jacob," she exclaimed, coming around to embrace him. "We weren't expecting you until tomorrow." "Change of plans," he replied, returning her hug before stepping back. "Hannah, I'd like to introduce Miss Tabitha Lawson. She's new to Montrose and in need of lodging. Tabitha, my sister, Hannah Cooper." Hannah's welcoming smile never faltered as she extended her hand to Tabitha. "Any friend of Jacob's is welcome here, Miss Lawson. We have a lovely room available on the first floor if that would suit." Relief washed over Tabitha. "That would be perfect, thank you." As Hannah prepared the guest register, Jacob leaned closer to Tabitha. "I'll call on Mrs. Henderson tomorrow about the millinery position if you'd like. Perhaps I could return in the afternoon to let you know what she says." "You've already been so kind. It's no trouble," he insisted. "Besides, I'd like to make sure you're settling in all right." Something in his expression, earnest and without pity or judgment, made Tabitha's heart flutter in a way it hadn't in years. She found herself agreeing before she could reconsider. After arrangements had been made and Jacob had taken his leave, Hannah showed Tabitha to a comfortable room with a large window overlooking a small garden. "My brother didn't mention how you two became acquainted," Hannah remarked as she lit the lamp on the bedside table. Tabitha hesitated, uncertain how much to reveal. "We met on the stage from Delta. He was very kind when others were not." Hannah's expression softened with understanding. "That sounds like Jacob. He's always had a keen sense of justice and a soft spot for those in need of a champion." She patted Tabitha's hand. "Get some rest, dear. Things always look brighter in the morning." Left alone, Tabitha sank onto the bed, exhausted from the day's journey and emotional turmoil. As she prepared for sleep, she found herself thinking of Jacob Harrington's quiet strength and unexpected kindness. For the first time since leaving Boston, she felt a small spark of hope for her future in this rugged frontier town. Morning dawned clear and bright, sunlight streaming through the curtains to wake Tabitha from a deep sleep. For a moment, she was disoriented, the unfamiliar room and distant sounds of a town coming to life confusing her senses. Then the events of the previous day came flooding back. and with them, the memory of Jacob Harrington and his promised visit. She rose and dressed carefully in one of her better dresses, a deep blue poplin with minimal adornment that complemented her fair coloring. Her figure had always been ample, even as a child, but she had learned to select styles that flattered rather than emphasized her size. After arranging her light brown hair in a simple but neat style, she felt prepared to face whatever the day might bring. Hannah greeted her warmly in the small dining room where a modest breakfast of eggs, biscuits, and preserves awaited. "I hope you slept well, Miss Lawson." "Very well, thank you," Tabitha replied honestly. "And please call me Tabitha." Hannah smiled as she poured coffee. "Tabitha, then." "Jacob stopped by at first light. He asked me to tell you he's spoken with Mrs. Henderson, who expressed interest in meeting you this morning if convenient." Tabitha nearly choked on her coffee. "This morning? So soon?" "That's Jacob for you, never one to let grass grow under his feet. Mrs. Henderson said she could see you at 10 o'clock at the Mercantile, if that suits." Excitement mingled with anxiety in Tabitha's chest. "Yes, of course. That would be wonderful." "I'll have Thomas show you the way," Hannah offered. "My husband delivers bread to the Mercantile each morning." "Thank you, but I believe I can find it," Tabitha said, remembering Jacob's impromptu tour. "Your brother pointed it out yesterday." Hannah's eyes twinkled with amusement. "Did he now? Well, in that case I won't trouble Thomas." She hesitated, then added casually, "Jacob mentioned he'd return this afternoon to hear how your meeting went." Tabitha felt her cheeks warm slightly under Hannah's knowing gaze. "He's been very kind." "Kindness is Jacob's nature," Hannah agreed, "but I haven't seen him quite so attentive in some time." Before Tabitha could formulate a response, another guest entered the dining room, and Hannah excused herself to attend to their needs. Left alone with her thoughts, Tabitha finished her breakfast while mentally preparing for her meeting with Mrs. Henderson. This opportunity could mean the difference between establishing herself in Montrose or being forced to move on. At precisely 10 o'clock, Tabitha presented herself at Henderson's Mercantile, a substantial establishment occupying a prime corner lot on Main Street. The bell above the door jangled as she entered, and she was immediately struck by the sheer variety of goods on display, from practical necessities, like tools and fabric, to modest luxuries, like imported tea and fancy stationery. A harried-looking clerk directed her to a small office at the rear of the store, where she found a handsome, middle-aged woman examining account books. "Mrs. Henderson, I'm Tabitha Lawson. Jacob Harrington mentioned you might be interested in speaking with me about millinery work." Eleanor Henderson looked up, her keen eyes assessing Tabitha with undisguised interest. "Indeed, Miss Lawson. Jacob spoke quite highly of your skills. Please sit down." She gestured to a chair opposite her desk. "I understand you operated a millinery shop in Boston." "Yes, with my father," Tabitha confirmed. "We specialized in ladies' hats and accessories for 15 years. And what brings you to Colorado?" Tabitha had prepared for this question. "My father passed away last year, and I decided a change of scenery might help me move forward. My cousin lives in the territory, so it seemed a natural choice." Mrs. Henderson nodded sympathetically. "I'm sorry for your loss. It's never easy to lose a parent, no matter our age." She tapped her pencil against her ledger. "Now, about the position, I've been considering adding a millinery department to the Mercantile. Currently, our ladies must order hats from catalogs or travel to Denver for quality pieces. A local milliner would be a valuable addition to our community." Hope bloomed in Tabitha's chest. "I've brought some sketches of my designs if you'd care to see them." For the next half hour, the two women discussed hat styles, materials, and business arrangements. Mrs. Henderson proved to be both shrewd and fair-minded, asking pointed questions about costs and production time while expressing genuine appreciation for Tabitha's artistic sensibility. "I believe we could come to an arrangement," she said finally. "I'd provide space in the mercantile and basic materials, while you would create and sell the hats with profits to be shared equally." Would that be acceptable? Tabitha could hardly believe her good fortune. "More than acceptable, Mrs. Henderson. I'm grateful for the opportunity." "Don't thank me yet," the older woman cautioned with a wry smile. "The ladies of Montrose can be particular about their finery. You'll need to prove your worth quickly." "I welcome the challenge," Tabitha assured her, as they finalized details. Mrs. Henderson mentioned casually, "Jacob seems quite taken with you. He rarely involves himself in others' affairs, yet he was most insistent that I meet with you immediately." Tabitha felt her cheeks flush. "We only met yesterday. I'm sure he was merely being neighborly." Mrs. Henderson's knowing look suggested she thought otherwise, but she merely said, "Jacob Harrington is one of the finest men in this county, honest to a fault and steadfast as the mountains. His friendship is worth cultivating, Miss Lawson." With arrangements made to begin work the following Monday, Tabitha left the mercantile with a lighter heart than she'd felt in months. She wandered through Montrose, familiarizing herself with the town that would be her new home. Despite its frontier roughness, the place had a certain charm: storefronts with fresh paint, women chatting on boardwalks, children playing in the spaces between buildings. She was examining the window display of a dressmaker's shop when a voice behind her made her start. "Find anything interesting?" Tabitha turned to find Jacob Harrington watching her with a smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. He had exchanged his travel-worn duster for a clean white shirt and dark vest, his sandy hair still damp from washing. "Jacob, I wasn't expecting to see you until later. Finished my business early and thought I might find you enjoying the sights." He nodded toward the window. "Planning your next creation." "Something like that," she admitted. "I was just admiring the fabric selection. Montrose is better stocked than I expected for a frontier town." "We're civilized in our own way," he said with good humor. Then, more seriously, "How did your meeting with Mrs. Henderson go?" Tabitha couldn't contain her smile. "Wonderfully. She's offered me space in the mercantile to set up a millinery department. I start on Monday." "That's excellent news," Jacob said, his expression genuinely pleased. "I knew she'd recognize quality when she saw it. I can't thank you enough for your help. First the stage, now this." Tabitha shook her head, overwhelmed by his continued kindness. "You can thank me by joining me for dinner," he suggested. "The hotel restaurant serves a fine steak and I'd enjoy the company, unless you have other plans." Tabitha hesitated, conscious of appearances. A single woman dining with a bachelor would certainly cause gossip in a small town like Montrose. Jacob seemed to read her thoughts. "Hannah and Thomas will be there as well," he added. "Very respectable." Relief and a touch of disappointment mingled in Tabitha's response. "In that case, I'd be delighted." They walked together toward the hotel, Jacob offering his arm in a gesture that felt both gallant and natural. Tabitha placed her hand lightly on his sleeve, acutely aware of his solid presence beside her. "Tell me about your ranch," she said, curious to know more about this man who had so unexpectedly entered her life. Jacob's face lit up as he described his property: a modest spread of 300 acres with a small herd of cattle, a vegetable garden, and a creek that ran year-round. "It's nothing grand," he acknowledged, "but the land is good and I've built a comfortable house. 2 bedrooms, a proper kitchen, even glass windows brought all the way from Denver." "It sounds lovely," Tabitha said sincerely. "It's missing some touches," Jacob admitted. "A woman's touch," Hannah says, "though I tell her it suits me fine as it is." Tabitha wondered if there was a message in his words but decided not to pursue it. They had only just met, after all, and she had learned to be cautious with her heart. The hotel restaurant was busy but not crowded, with white cloths on the tables and a small vase of wildflowers as a centerpiece. Hannah waved them over to a table where she sat with a tall, broad-shouldered man with kind eyes. "Tabitha, this is my husband, Thomas Cooper." "Thomas, Miss Tabitha Lawson, our newest guest and Jacob's friend." Thomas stood and pulled out a chair for Tabitha. "A pleasure, Miss Lawson. Hannah tells me you're to be Montrose's newest businesswoman." "Word travels fast," Tabitha observed with a smile. "In a town this size, breathing too loudly is news by supper time," Thomas joked, earning a playful swat from his wife. The meal was one of the most pleasant Tabitha could remember. The food was simple but well prepared, and the conversation flowed easily among the four of them. Thomas proved to be as warm and welcoming as his wife, while Jacob revealed a dry wit that frequently set them all laughing. As they lingered over coffee and apple pie, Hannah asked, "Have you found permanent lodging yet, Tabitha?" "You're welcome at the inn as long as you wish, of course, but I imagine you'll want your own space eventually." "I haven't had time to look," Tabitha admitted. "Perhaps Mrs. Henderson might have suggestions." "There's the Widow Jenkins' place," Thomas offered. "She's been looking to rent out her extra room since her daughter married that mine engineer from our Ray." Jacob nodded thoughtfully. "Sarah Jenkins is a fine woman, and her house is just 2 streets over from the Mercantile. I could make inquiries tomorrow if you'd like." "You're all being so kind," Tabitha said, momentarily overwhelmed. "I'm not accustomed to such assistance." Hannah reached across the table to pat her hand. "That's how we survive out here. We help each other." As the evening drew to a close, Jacob offered to walk Tabitha to her room. They paused in the small garden behind the inn, where the scent of night-blooming flowers hung heavy in the air. "Thank you for dinner," Tabitha said, suddenly shy under the silver wash of moonlight. "It was lovely meeting your family." "They like you," Jacob replied simply. Then, with a hint of vulnerability, "I like you too, Tabitha Lawson." She ducked her head, unsure how to respond to such directness. "We've only just met." "True enough," he acknowledged. "But I've found that out here, life moves at a different pace than back east. When something or someone feels right, there's little sense in pretending otherwise." He stepped closer, not crowding her but close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him in the cool night air. "I'd like to call on you properly if you're amenable. Sunday after church, perhaps." Tabitha's heart fluttered traitorously. She had come to Colorado to rebuild her life, not to entangle herself with a man, no matter how kind. And yet, Jacob Harrington represented everything she had never found in Boston: genuine regard, respect, and a complete absence of judgment about her size. "I would like that," she found herself saying. His smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "Then I'll count the hours." He took her hand and with old-fashioned courtesy pressed a chaste kiss to her knuckles. "Good night, Tabitha. Sleep well." She watched him walk away, his tall figure silhouetted against the lamplight from the street. Only when he had disappeared from view did she release the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. With Mrs. Henderson's assistance, Tabitha secured a room at Sarah Jenkins' house, a tidy bungalow with a small garden and a view of the distant mountains. The widow proved to be a cheerful, no-nonsense woman in her 50s who appreciated Tabitha's quiet nature and respect for privacy. "It'll be nice having another woman in the house," Mrs. Jenkins confided as she showed Tabitha the room. "Too quiet since Mary left, and I never did cotton to living alone, truth be told." At the Mercantile, Tabitha threw herself into establishing her millinery section. Mrs. Henderson had cleared a corner near the window, providing good light and visibility from the street. Jacob appeared on Friday afternoon, driving a wagon loaded with lumber and tools. "Mrs. Henderson mentioned you needed shelving," he explained, already rolling up his sleeves. "Thought I'd lend a hand." By Saturday evening, the millinery corner boasted elegant shelving, a small workbench, and a mirror for customers to admire their selections. Tabitha arranged her sample hats brought carefully from Boston and set out her tools with a sense of satisfaction. "It looks splendid," Mrs. Henderson declared. "You've transformed the space completely." "I had help," Tabitha acknowledged, glancing at Jacob, who was washing sawdust from his hands at the back sink. "Yes, you certainly did," Mrs. Henderson replied with a knowing smile. "Jacob Harrington isn't known for carpentry work, my dear. When he offers his skills, it's a particular compliment." Sunday dawned clear and mild. Tabitha dressed with special care in her best dress, a forest green silk that she had remade from one of her mother's gowns. It was perhaps a year out of fashion by Boston standards, but the color flattered her complexion, and the cut was modest without being matronly. Mrs. Jenkins accompanied her to the small clapboard church on Cedar Street, introducing her to what seemed like half the town before the service began. Tabitha spotted Jacob sitting with Hannah and Thomas, his tall frame unmistakable even from the back. As if sensing her gaze, he turned and smiled, the simple gesture causing her pulse to quicken. After the service, he made his way through the crowd to her side. "Miss Lawson," he greeted her formally, tipping his hat. "You look lovely this morning." "Thank you, Mr. Harrington," she replied with equal formality, though her eyes danced with suppressed amusement at the game. Mrs. Jenkins observed their exchange with interest before tactfully excusing herself to speak with the pastor's wife. "I thought we might take a drive," Jacob suggested once they were relatively private. "I packed a picnic, if that appeals." "A picnic sounds wonderful," Tabitha agreed. "Should I change first?" "You're perfect as you are," he assured her, offering his arm. "My buggy's just around the corner." The buggy proved to be a well-maintained buckboard with a fresh coat of black paint and a spirited bay horse in the traces. Jacob helped Tabitha up to the seat with careful hands, then climbed up beside her and took the reins. "I thought we might head out toward my place," he said as they left the town behind. "There's a nice spot by the creek for a picnic." As they traveled, the landscape opened up around them, rolling hills giving way to meadows dotted with wildflowers, with the majestic San Juan Mountains providing a dramatic backdrop. Tabitha breathed deeply, savoring the clean air and open spaces so different from Boston's crowded streets. "It's beautiful here," she said softly. "So vast and untamed." Jacob nodded, his expression thoughtful. "That's what drew me after the war. All that death and destruction, I needed space to breathe, to remember there was still beauty in the world." "My father felt the same way when he returned," Tabitha shared. "He would spend hours walking in the public garden just looking at the flowers. He said it helped quiet the memories." Jacob glanced at her, his gray eyes understanding. "Did it work?" "Most days," she said. Some nights were harder than others. They lapsed into comfortable silence until Jacob turned the buckboard onto a narrow track leading toward a cluster of cottonwood trees. As they drew closer, Tabitha could make out a modest but well-built ranch house nestled against the hillside, with several outbuildings and a corral where horses grazed peacefully. "Welcome to the Lazy H," Jacob said with a hint of pride. "Not much compared to some spreads, but it's home." "It's lovely," Tabitha said sincerely, admiring the obvious care that had gone into the property. Instead of stopping at the house, Jacob continued along the track until they reached a grove of trees beside a clear, shallow creek. He pulled the buckboard to a halt in a shady spot and jumped down to help Tabitha descend. "This is my favorite place on the property," he confided as he spread a blanket beneath a large cottonwood. "Peaceful, good for thinking." From a hamper behind the seat, he produced a surprisingly elaborate picnic fried chicken, bread rolls, pickles, apple pie, and a bottle of lemonade. Tabitha helped arrange the feast on the blanket, touched by the effort he had made. "Did you prepare all this yourself?" she asked, impressed. Jacob laughed, the sound warming her more than the sunshine. "Lord, no, Hannah packed it. If I'd done the cooking, we'd be eating charred beans and hardtack." "You can't cook?" Tabitha asked, amused. "I can manage not to starve," he admitted ruefully, "but that's about the extent of my culinary talents. Mostly I eat at the hotel when I'm in town or make do with simple fare at home." "I enjoy cooking," Tabitha offered. "My mother taught me before she passed, and I've always found it soothing." "Another talent to add to your list," Jacob observed, his tone warm with admiration. He raised his tin cup of lemonade in a toast. "To new beginnings in Montrose." "To new beginnings," she echoed, touching her cup to his. They ate companionably, the conversation flowing easily between them. Jacob told stories of his early days as a cowhand, while Tabitha shared anecdotes from her millinery business in Boston. As the afternoon wore on, clouds began to gather over the mountains, promising an evening shower. "We should head back before it rains," Jacob said reluctantly, gathering the picnic supplies. As they packed the hamper, their hands brushed, sending a jolt of awareness through Tabitha. She glanced up to find Jacob watching her, his expression intense. "Tabitha," he said softly, "may I call on you again? Perhaps dinner at the hotel on Wednesday." "I'd like that very much," she replied, her voice steadier than her pulse. He smiled, relief evident in his eyes. "Good, that's good." They rode back to town in comfortable silence, the air between them charged with unspoken possibilities. When Jacob delivered Tabitha to Mrs. Jenkins' door, he held her hand a moment longer than strictly necessary. "Until Wednesday," he said, his voice low and intimate. "Until Wednesday," she echoed, reluctant to break the connection. As promised, Jacob called for her Wednesday evening and again on Saturday. Each time, Tabitha found herself more drawn to his quiet strength and genuine kindness. He never commented on her size, never showed impatience when she needed to rest during their walks, never made her feel anything less than admired and respected. At the Mercantile, her millinery business flourished as word spread of her skill and artistic eye. The ladies of Montrose, starved for Eastern fashion, flocked to order custom hats and accessories. Mrs. Henderson, pleased with the increased foot traffic, expanded Tabitha's space and ordered additional materials from Denver. "You're good for business," she told Tabitha approvingly. "And if I may say so, good for Jacob Harrington as well. He smiles more these days." Tabitha ducked her head to hide her blush, focusing on the hat she was trimming with silk flowers. "We enjoy each other's company." "So I've noticed," Mrs. Henderson replied dryly, "as has the rest of the town. You realize you're the subject of considerable speculation." Tabitha's hand stilled. "Speculation. Nothing malicious," Mrs. Henderson assured her quickly. "Quite the opposite. Jacob's well respected here, and people are pleased to see him taking an interest in something besides cattle and horses. There's already talk of when, not if, you two might announce an engagement." Alarmed, Tabitha set down her work. "But we've only known each other a few weeks." "This isn't Boston, my dear. Out here, folks don't have the luxury of extended courtships. Life is harder, shorter in many ways. When two people find compatibility, they tend to recognize it quickly." Mrs. Henderson patted her hand. "I'm not saying you should rush. only that you shouldn't be surprised by the talk." Tabitha nodded, though her mind was troubled. She had come to care deeply for Jacob, perhaps even to love him, but marriage. She hadn't allowed herself to consider it, convinced that no man would truly want a woman of her size as a wife. Despite Jacob's attentions, a part of her still feared that his interest would wane once the novelty of her presence faded. That evening, as they walked along the river after dinner, Jacob seemed unusually quiet. "Is everything all right?" Tabitha finally asked. "You seem preoccupied." Jacob stopped, turning to face her. In the fading light, his expression was difficult to read. "I had an interesting conversation with Thomas today." "Oh," she prompted when he didn't continue. "He mentioned that you might be uncertain about my intentions." Jacob ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she had come to recognize as a sign of nervousness. "He suggested I might need to be more clear." Tabitha's heart began to race. "Jacob, please let me finish," he interrupted gently. "I'm not good with flowery words, Tabitha. I'm a simple man with a simple life to offer. But in the weeks since that stage ride, I've come to admire you more than any woman I've ever known. Your courage in starting over, your kindness, your talent, everything about you speaks to something in me I thought long buried after the war." He took her hands in his touch warm and sure. "I love you, Tabitha Lawson. I believe I started falling in love with you the moment you thanked me on that stage, looking at me like I'd done something remarkable when all I'd done was the decent thing." His voice grew husky with emotion. "I don't want to rush you, but I needed you to know where I stand. When, if you're ready, I want to build a life with you." Tabitha stood frozen, overwhelmed by his declaration. In all her 28 years, no man had ever spoken to her with such sincere admiration, let alone professed love. A lifetime of insecurities rose up to choke her response. "You can't possibly," she began. "Don't tell me what I can or cannot feel," he said firmly. "I know my own heart, Tabitha. But I'm not like other women," she whispered, forcing herself to voice her deepest fear. "I'm not slim or graceful. I never will be." Understanding dawned in Jacob's eyes, followed swiftly by determination. With deliberate care, he framed her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his gaze. "You think I don't see you, all of you?" he asked softly. "I see a woman of substance, inside and out. A woman whose smile lights up a room, whose hands create beauty, whose heart has enough kindness to defend a stranger on a stage-coach." His thumbs gently brushed her cheeks. "I see a woman I want to wake up beside every morning and fall asleep with every night. I see you, Tabitha, and I love what I see." Tears spilled over onto her cheeks as years of carefully maintained defenses crumbled under the weight of his sincerity. "I love you too," she admitted, her voice barely audible. Joy transformed Jacob's face. "Say that again," he urged. "I love you," she repeated, stronger this time. "I think I've loved you since you stood on that stagecoach for 3 hours without a word of complaint." With a sound that was half laugh, half groan, Jacob pulled her into his arms and lowered his mouth to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, a question rather than a demand. When Tabitha responded, her arms sliding around his neck, the kiss deepened into something that spoke of longing and promise and a future waiting to unfold. When they finally parted, both breathing heavily, Jacob pressed his forehead to hers. "Marry me, Tabitha." "Not someday, not when you're ready. Marry me as soon as it can be arranged," she laughed, dizzy with happiness. "Are you always this impatient?" "Only about things that matter," he assured her, stealing another quick kiss. "Is that a yes?" "Yes," she whispered against his lips. "Yes, I'll marry you, Jacob Harrington." The news of their engagement spread through Montrose with predictable speed. Hannah was the first to congratulate them, hugging Tabitha tightly and whispering, "Welcome to the family, sister." Mrs. Henderson presented them with a fine china tea service, while Mrs. Jenkins insisted on hosting an engagement dinner. They were married 4 weeks later in the small church on Cedar Street, with Hannah as matron of honor and Thomas as best man. Tabitha wore a dove-gray silk dress she had made herself, with a matching hat adorned with forget-me-nots and silver ribbon. Jacob, resplendent in a new black suit, could scarcely take his eyes off her throughout the ceremony. "You are so beautiful," he whispered as they turned to face their guests after the pastor pronounced them husband and wife. For perhaps the first time in her adult life, Tabitha believed it. The reception at the hotel was a joyous affair, with what seemed like the entire town in attendance. Even Mrs. Edwards, the snobbish woman from the stagecoach, made an appearance, offering stiff congratulations before claiming a distant acquaintance required her attention elsewhere. "She still doesn't like me," Tabitha observed with amusement. Jacob shrugged, unconcerned. "Her loss." Some people never learn to see beyond the surface. As the celebration wound down, Hannah pulled Tabitha aside. "I've had Thomas prepare the bugboard for you," she said, her eyes twinkling. "Jacob's your place now is all ready. I aired out the house and stocked the pantry yesterday." "Thank you," Tabitha said, suddenly nervous at the thought of her wedding night. Hannah seemed to sense her apprehension. "Jacob is a good man," she said softly. "Kind and patient. Trust him and trust yourself." The ride to the ranch was quiet, both of them wrapped in their own thoughts as the stars emerged in the vast Colorado sky. When they arrived, Jacob lifted Tabitha from the buckboard and, to her surprise, swept her into his arms to carry her across the threshold. "Jacob," she protested, instinctively worried about her weight. "You'll hurt yourself." "Not a chance," he assured her, kicking the door shut behind them. "I've carried half-grown calves further than this." He set her down gently in the center of the main room, keeping his arms around her waist. "Welcome home, Mrs. Harrington." The house was warm and welcoming, with a fire crackling in the hearth and fresh wildflowers on the table. Someone Hannah, she suspected, had lit lamps and turned down the bed in the main bedroom, visible through an open door. "It's lovely," Tabitha said, meaning it. Though simply furnished, the house was clean and solid, with touches of craftsmanship in the carved mantel and sturdy furniture. "It's better with you in it," Jacob replied, his voice dropping to a lower register that sent shivers up her spine. "Everything is better with you, Tabitha." He lowered his head to kiss her, and this time there was no hesitation, no holding back. Tabitha melted into him, her earlier nervousness giving way to a rising tide of desire as his hands moved reverently over her back and shoulders. "I want to show you how much I love you," he murmured against her lips. "Every inch of you." The way he emphasized every left no doubt about his meaning. Tabitha felt heat rising to her face, but it was not entirely from embarrassment. "I want that too," she admitted. With infinite tenderness, Jacob led her to the bedroom, where they discovered together the deep joy of physical love between two people who truly see and cherish each other. Later, as they lay tangled together in the aftermath of passion, Jacob traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "Happy?" he asked softly. Tabitha pressed a kiss to his chest, where his heart beat steady and true beneath her cheek. "Completely," she assured him. "Are you?" "More than I thought possible," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "When I came back from the war, I didn't think I'd ever feel whole again. Then you stepped off that stagecoach in Delta, and something inside me recognized you like my soul had been waiting for you all along." Tabitha raised herself on one elbow to look into his face, touched beyond words by his confession. "I never thought I'd find someone who could love me as I am," she admitted. "In Boston, men either ignored me entirely or treated me as an object of ridicule. I'd resigned myself to spinsterhood. Their blindness was my good fortune, Jacob said simply, pulling her back into his embrace. And I plan to spend the rest of my life making sure you never doubt your worth again. As summer gave way to fall and fall to winter, Tabitha settled into life as a rancher's wife with unexpected ease. She continued her millinery business in town 3 days a week, while devoting the rest of her time to their home. She learned to cook on a wood stove, to preserve fruits and vegetables for winter, to manage a household with limited resources but abundant love. Jacob, true to his word, never missed an opportunity to show his appreciation for her bringing home wildflowers, because they reminded me of your smile, praising her cooking to anyone who would listen, holding her close each night as if she were the most precious thing in his world. When spring returned to the valley, bringing new calves to the herd and fresh green to the meadows, Tabitha discovered she was expecting their first child. Jacob's joy was boundless. He insisted on hiring a ranch hand to take over the heaviest work, freeing him to accompany Tabitha on her trips to town and ensure her comfort in every way possible. "You're hovering, husband," she teased him one evening as he adjusted pillows behind her back for the 3rd time. "I'm caring for my family," he corrected, placing a gentle hand on her growing belly. "Both of you." The baby, a son they named William Thomas Harrington, arrived on a crisp October morning, with Hannah and the town midwife in attendance. Jacob paced the porch until the infant's first cry split the air, then burst into the bedroom to find Tabitha exhausted but radiant, a small bundle cradled in her arms. "We have a son," she whispered as he knelt beside the bed, awestruck. "He's perfect," Jacob said, his voice breaking as he touched a finger to the baby's tiny hand, "just like his mother." As William grew from infant to toddler, their family expanded again with the arrival of Elizabeth Hannah Harrington, born on a summer night with her father delivering her when the midwife couldn't arrive in time. "You were magnificent," Jacob told Tabitha afterward, his face still pale from the experience but his eyes shining with pride and love. "We were magnificent," she corrected, reaching for his hand. "Together." 5 years after that fateful stagecoach journey, Tabitha stood on the porch of their expanded ranch house, watching Jacob teach William to ride his first pony, while Elizabeth played with blocks at her feet. The Lazy H had prospered under their joint management, with Jacob's hard work and Tabitha's shrewd business sense combining to create one of the most respected small ranches in the county. Her millinery business had evolved as well. She now employed 2 assistants at the mercantile and had begun designing women's clothing that accommodated various figures, a radical concept that nevertheless found eager customers among the practical women of Montrose. "Mama, look," William called, managing to guide his pony in a small circle while Jacob beamed with paternal pride. "Wonderful, darling," she called back, her heart full to bursting with love for her family. Later that evening, after the children were asleep, Jacob joined her on the porch with 2 cups of coffee. They sat together on the swing he had built for her birthday, watching the stars emerge over their land. "You ever regret it?" he asked suddenly. "Coming west, marrying a rough cowboy, living out here away from city comforts?" Tabitha turned to him, surprised by the question after all this time. "Never," she said firmly. "Not for a single moment." He nodded, seemingly satisfied, but she sensed there was more he wanted to say. "What's troubling you, love?" Jacob sighed, setting aside his coffee cup to take her hands in his. "I saw Mrs. Edwards in town today. She made a comment not worth repeating, but it got me thinking about that stage ride." His eyes, still as captivating as the day they met, searched hers. "I've never asked why you were traveling alone that day. It couldn't have been easy." Tabitha was quiet for a moment, considering her answer. After my father died, the millinery shop fell into debt. I tried to manage, but without his business sense, I was floundering." She squeezed his hands, drawing strength from his steady presence. "A gentleman, a long-time customer, offered to help. I thought he was being kind, but his assistance came with expectations I wasn't willing to meet." Jacob's expression darkened. "He tried to take advantage of you." "He tried," she confirmed. "When I refused, he called in the loans my father had taken for the shop. I had to sell everything to cover the debts. Coming west to stay with Eliza was my only option, though as it turned out, she had already left Delta. So when I found you that day, I was completely alone with almost no money and nowhere to go," she admitted. "When the driver refused to let me board the stage, I truly thought I'd reached the end of my rope." Jacob pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I thank God every day that I was there." "As do I," she whispered, resting her head on his shoulder. "You know, for years I believed my size was a burden, something to be apologized for, hidden when possible, endured when not. It wasn't until I met you that I understood it was simply part of who I am, neither good nor bad in itself." "You're perfect exactly as you are," Jacob said with the same conviction he'd shown from the beginning. "Though I must admit, I'm particularly fond of these curves." His hand settled on her hip with familiar intimacy. Tabitha laughed, the sound echoing across the quiet ranch yard. "Jacob Harrington, you're incorrigible." "Only with you," he assured her, his smile turning mischievous. "Care to join me inside, Mrs. Harrington? I believe I still owe you a back rub after all that gardening yesterday." "A back rub," she repeated skeptically. "Is that what we're calling it now?" His laughter joined hers as he stood and pulled her gently to her feet. "Among other things." Hand in hand, they walked into their home, their love a testament to the fact that sometimes the greatest journeys begin with a simple act of kindness and the courage to see beyond the surface to the heart within. 10 years after their wedding day, Tabitha sat at her desk in the small office behind Henderson's Mercantile, now Henderson, and Lawson's Dry Goods and Apparel, reviewing the quarterly accounts. Her business partnership with Alina Henderson had evolved over the years, expanding from millinery to women's clothing and eventually to a full partnership when Alina's husband passed away. The bell over the shop door jingled, and Tabitha glanced up to see Jacob entering, their youngest child, 3-year-old James, perched on his shoulders. At 43, Jacob's hair was beginning to silver at the temples, and lines of laughter framed his eyes, but he carried himself with the same quiet strength that had first attracted her. "There's my favorite shopkeeper," he called, setting James down to run to his mother. "And here's my favorite customer," Tabitha replied, rising to embrace both her son and husband. "What brings you two into town on a Tuesday?" "William forgot his lunch," Jacob explained, producing a cloth-wrapped package. "He's helping Thomas at the bakery today. And this young man wanted to see his mama." He ruffled James's dark hair affectionately. "Is that so?" Tabitha knelt to her son's level. "Well, I'm very glad to see you too, sweetheart," James grinned, revealing a recently lost tooth. "Papa says we can have ice cream if we're good while you finish working." "Did he now?" Tabitha raised an eyebrow at her husband. "And what about Elizabeth?" "Already arranged," Jacob assured her. "Hannah's bringing her to town after her piano lesson. We thought we might make an afternoon of it, family dinner at the hotel." Tabitha glanced at her ledgers, then back at the hopeful faces of her husband and son. "The accounts could wait." "That sounds wonderful. Let me just tell Miss Cooper I'm leaving early." As they walked down Main Street, James between them, swinging from their hands, Tabitha reflected on how much Montrose had grown over the decade. What had once been a rough frontier town now boasted a proper school, a small hospital, and even a theater that occasionally hosted traveling shows from Denver. Their own family had grown and thrived as well. William, now 9, was showing a keen interest in baking, spending hours with Thomas Cooper learning to make bread and pastries. 8-year-old Elizabeth was already a talented pianist, taking lessons from the pastor's wife. And little James, the surprise addition to their family when Tabitha was 40, had his father's charm and his mother's artistic eye. "Penny for your thoughts," Jacob said, noticing her contemplative expression. "I was just thinking about how much has changed," she replied. "When I stepped off that stagecoach, I never imagined any of this." Jacob squeezed her hand. "Best decision I ever made giving up that seat. Best decision I ever made accepting it," she countered with a smile. At the ice cream parlor, a recent addition to Montrose's growing business district, they met Hannah and Elizabeth, as well as Thomas and William, who had closed the bakery early. The expanded Harrington Cooper clan filled a corner table, their conversation and laughter drawing smiles from other patrons. "Did you tell her yet?" Hannah asked Jacob as the children debated the relative merits of chocolate versus strawberry ice cream. Jacob shook his head. "Was waiting for the right moment." "Tell me what?" Tabitha asked, glancing between the siblings. Jacob reached into his pocket and withdrew an envelope. "This came on yesterday's mail coach from Boston." Tabitha took the envelope with trembling fingers. She had little connection to her hometown now, having built her life in Colorado. The return address made her breath catch. Whitman and Sons, attorneys at law. "Open it," Jacob encouraged gently. She broke the seal and unfolded the letter inside, reading quickly, her expression shifting from confusion to disbelief. "What is it, Mama?" Elizabeth asked, noticing her mother's reaction. "It's about Mr. Cosgrove," Tabitha said faintly. "The man who forced me to sell our shop." She looked up at Jacob. "He's died and apparently had a change of heart before the end. His will stipulates that his estate is to make reparations to those he wronged in business dealings." "Reparations?" Thomas echoed. "Money," Tabitha clarified, still staring at the figure on the page. "Quite a substantial amount, actually." She handed the letter to Jacob, who whistled softly as he read the sum. "That's enough to," he began, "expand the shop," Tabitha finished for him. Or, Hannah prompted. Tabitha looked around the table at her family, not just Jacob and the children, but Hannah and Thomas too, who had become as dear to her as blood relations. "Or we could use it to start something new, something for all of us." Later that night, after the children were asleep, Jacob and Tabitha sat on their porch swing, wrapped in a quilt against the autumn chill. They had spent hours discussing possibilities for the unexpected windfall, expanding the store, buying additional ranch land, setting aside funds for the children's education. "Whatever we decide," Jacob said, his arm warm around her shoulders, "I want you to know I'm proud of what you've built here. Not just the business, but this life, our life." Tabitha leaned into him, secure in the knowledge that this man who had once given up his seat to a stranger had never once regretted his choice. "We built it together," she reminded him, "from the moment you stood up on that stagecoach." Jacob chuckled, the sound rumbling pleasantly against her ear. "You know, I never told you this, but I had the worst saddle sores that day from a new horse I was breaking. Standing was actually a relief." Tabitha sat up, staring at him in disbelief. "Jacob Harrington, all these years you've let me believe you were suffering nobly for my comfort," he grinned, unrepentant. "Well, I might have been exaggerating slightly about the relief part. It was still a mighty uncomfortable ride." He pulled her back into his embrace. "But I'd have stood twice as long just to see you smile the way you did when I offered that seat." She shook her head, unable to maintain even mock indignation in the face of his charm. You impossible man. You're impossible man, he corrected, tipping her face up for a kiss that, even after a decade of marriage, still made her heart race. As the stars wheeled overhead and the distant coyotes sang to the moon, Tabitha Harrington offered a silent prayer of gratitude for stage coaches, reluctant drivers, and the cowboy who had changed her life with a simple act of kindness. Whatever the future held, new business ventures, growing children, the inevitable challenges life would bring, she would face it with Jacob beside her, standing together through whatever came their way. And in the end, that was all that truly mattered.